Imagine you were in the ancient world 100,000 years ago. How would you live 100,000 years ago, where there is danger all around? How would you survive? What did you eat? What did you wear? What did you do? In this video, we will analyze and tell the whole story of our hero Kai, who will tell us everything. Watch the video until the end, and you will be surprised by the unexpected ending. Here's a number that breaks most of what you think about this. If you were born 100,000 years ago, your life expectancy at birth would be about 30 years. That's the number everyone quotes. And it's completely misleading. Because the most common age of death for adults in these societies isn't 30, it's between 68 and 78. Both numbers are true. Here's how. Roughly 43% of children died before they turned 15. That drags the average down to 30. But if you made it past 15, you had a 64% chance of reaching 45, and the typical old person died in their early 70s. So it was never everyone died at 30. It was either you died as a small child or you lived to be old. There was almost no middle. That's the world you've woken up in. And over the next 12 minutes, I'm going to tell you exactly how you'd live in it. What you'd wear. What you'd eat. What you'd own. How you'd sleep. What would kill you. And who else would be walking around on this planet with you. All of it from real excavations. Real dates. Real bones. Let's start with the biggest myth of all. You would be wearing clothes. Not a fur draped over one shoulder. Actual made clothing. And we can date that surprisingly precisely, using lice. Body lice can only live on clothing, so they couldn't exist before clothes did. A DNA study at the University of Florida tracked when body lice split off from head lice, and the answer came back at about 170,000 years ago. Read that again. By the time you wake up, humans have been wearing clothes for 70,000 years. Clothing is older, at this point, than everything else in this video put together. Next, get your bearings in time because almost everyone places this wrong. Our species is roughly 300,000 years old. The oldest fossils come from Morocco. So 100,000 years ago is not the beginning of humanity. It's the middle. The people around you have been fully human. Your brain, your body, for 200,000 years already. And here's what doesn't exist yet. Those famous painted caves in France? 36,000 years old. That's 64,000 years in your future. The oldest known bone flute? 40,000. Farming is 10,000. Writing, the wheel, money, cities. None of it, not for another 90 millennia. Now, the fact that genuinely surprises people. You would not be the only kind of human on Earth. Today, there's exactly one. We think of that as normal. It isn't. It's recent. 100,000 years ago, there are at least 4. Neanderthals are alive across Europe and Western Asia, and they don't disappear for another 60,000 years. Denisovans are spread across Asia. On the Indonesian island of Flores, there's a human species barely a meter tall, alive right through this period. And late populations of Homo erectus, the first humans ever to leave Africa, are still hanging on until about 110,000 years ago. All of them make tools. All of them use fire. All of them bury their dead. And in the Levant, the burial customs of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens look strikingly similar, which tells us these groups weren't isolated. They knew about each other. We've only been alone on this planet for the last 30 to 40,000 years. So what does your actual day look like? Shorter than you'd guess. Studies of the last group still living this way found that acquiring food takes about 15 to 20 hours a week. Now, I'll be straight with you. That figure only counts hunting and gathering. Add cooking, tool making, hauling water and childcare, and the honest total lands closer to 40 hours. So it's not a holiday. But there's no clock anywhere in this world, no boss, and large parts of the afternoon where nothing at all is required of you. You'd sleep about 6.5 hours a night. That surprises people too. Everyone assumes ancient humans slept for 10. They didn't. Sensors on 3 living hunter-gatherer groups across more than 1,000 nights found an average of about 6.4 hours, which is the low end of what you're getting right now. But their languages have no word for insomnia. What would you eat? We don't have to guess, because their rubbish survived. In the layers at Kafza Cave in Israel, dated to this period, excavators found the bones of gazelle, horse, fallow deer, wild ox, and rhinoceros. Also tortoises, which were a reliable food source because they don't run away. Plus a collection of seashells and hearths, fireplaces used repeatedly. So, red meat, a lot of it, cooked on a fire, supplemented with shellfish, plants, and whatever small animals were slow enough to catch. Now let's talk about your tools, because this is where primitive falls apart completely. The dominant technique at these sites is called levallois. Here's what it actually involves. You don't hit a rock until a sharp bit falls off. You take a stone core and you spend a long time preparing it, striking flake after flake away, shaping the core, turning it, sculpting a form that doesn't exist yet. Then, one precise strike, and a finished tool separates from the core, sharp, symmetrical, the right shape, ready to use immediately. Think about what that requires. You have to hold the finished object in your mind and work backwards to reach it, through a dozen steps that produce nothing usable. That's not instinct. That's engineering. What would you own? Jewelry, for one. At school in Kafza, people at almost exactly this date collected shells from a shoreline more than 20 miles away, worked them, and strung them to be worn. That's a 40-mile round trip on foot, so that something could hang at your throat. And then there's the find that stops archaeologists in their tracks. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, in layers dated to 100,000 years ago exactly, excavators found a workshop. Not pigment on a wall, a production process. Here's the recipe they reconstructed. Ochre, ground into a fine powder against quartzite slabs. Mixed with crushed seal bone, charcoal, stone chips, and a liquid. The mixture was then poured into 2 abalone shells, and one of them was found with a stone placed over the opening, as a lid. Why seal bone specifically? Because seal bone is rich in oil and fat, which is exactly what you need to bind a paint. They'd worked that out. They were choosing ingredients for their chemical properties. And the detail that matters most, they stored it. The lid researcher calls this a benchmark in the evolution of complex human cognition, the ability to source ingredients, combine them, and keep the result for later. Storage isn't survival behavior. It's proof that tomorrow existed in their heads as a real place worth preparing for. I'll be honest about the limits here, because the study is, we don't know what the paint was for. Decoration is one possibility. Sun protection is another. Both are still open. Now, what happens when you die? At Kafze, archaeologists found as many as 15 individuals buried in the cave, along with 71 pieces of red ochre and ochre-stained tools, placed near the bones in a pattern that reads as ritual rather than accident. One of those burials is a boy of about 12 or 13. He was laid in a hollow cut into the rock, positioned on his side, and the antlers of a fallow deer had been cut free, carried in, and placed deliberately across his body. At the neighboring site of school, a man was buried with the lower jaw of a wild boar resting on his chest. Nobody does that for a corpse. That's a message, written 100,000 years before writing. And there's one more thing found among these people that I think tells you more than any tool ever could. A child born with hydrocephalus, fluid on the brain, who survived to roughly 3 years old. That is only possible with constant daily care from a group that got nothing back for it. No labor, no future hunter, no advantage of any kind. They carried a child who could not contribute For 3 years, because that was simply what you did. So, what would actually kill you? Not what you're picturing. Predators are a minor cause. The big killers are infectious disease. In studies of living hunter-gatherers, disease accounts for around 70% of recorded deaths, plus violence and accidents. And for children specifically, it's overwhelmingly infection. What you wouldn't die of: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, most cancers, and the crowd diseases like measles, smallpox, and flu. Those need dense, settled populations, and those are 10,000 years away. So let's answer the question directly. If you woke up there tomorrow, would you make it? Almost certainly not, and not for the reason you think. Your problem isn't strength, it's that you don't know where the water is. Everyone born into that landscape carries a map in their head of every seep and seasonal pool built in childhood. You have none of it, and you have about 3 days. But here's the part that changes the whole picture. These specific people, the ones at school in Kafze, with the shell necklaces and the antler burials, did not survive. They were an early wave out of Africa, tens of thousands of years before the migration that finally populated the world. Around 75,000 years ago, they vanish from the record. Wasn't war. The climate turned colder and drier, forests retreated, and the conditions favored Neanderthals, who moved into the very same caves. Most researchers think this group left no descendants at all. That's still debated, but it's the mainstream picture. So think about what that actually means. They had clothing, engineered tools, chemistry, jewelry, funerals, and the kind of mercy that carries a dying child for 3 years. Every single thing we point to as proof that we're special, they already had 100,000 years ago. And none of it saved them. They weren't a rough draft of us. They were a finished version that lost. Which means being human was never the thing that guaranteed survival. It was just the thing that made losing matter. That's the real answer to what would happen if you woke up 100,000 years ago. You'd find people exactly like you, doing everything you'd do, and you'd be standing in a world that was about to forget them completely. The only reason you know they existed at all is that someone dug up a cave and found the antlers still lying where they were placed.